Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bull Take Scouting Podcast. We are now within a month of the first round of the NFL draft. It's a super excited time, and as soon as that calendar switches to April, I bet there's going to be so many people in the NFL community really gearing into focusing on the NFL draft. And so, what we're going to be doing today is bringing you our running back and tight end top 5 rankings and breaking down why we ordered the guys the way we did. And I think these are really interesting positions to evaluate, both in general and this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think, at least on the offensive side of the ball, probably running backs and tight ends are one of the most difficult, or the two most difficult positions to project to the NFL level. I think running backs, you obviously have to take into account how running backs have been devalued and how many running backs can become RB1s as rookies, as second year players, and then they're kind of out of rotation by year 4 and 5. And then tight ends, you just really have to think about the massive transition that it takes for a college tight end to transition his game into the NFL because it is just a vastly different position and things you're asked to do. So what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. They're really difficult to evaluate for completely different reasons. For running backs, it's being able to predict whether or not they're going to be able to be durable and productive for a few years in the NFL, and also just factoring into your grade how much to devalue them because they play that certain position. That's what really gets me with running backs specifically. And then with tight ends, it's you see a guy with traits galore and you see so much receiving potential, but he was underutilized in the passing game. And so what do you do to reconcile that in your projection? Because you know it's going to be a big adjustment, but he has the traits to reach that ceiling. So I know for both these positions, you really have a type. You like these tight ends who are underutilized as receivers, but have the traits to offer them the potential. And for running backs, you like your big bruisers who are going to be able to power through contact and churn forward for extra yards every play.
Yes, I love the bruisers at running back. To me, it really starts from where I fell in love with the game of football, of just like guys just running over each other and just straight power and strength. So that's really why I just love watching running backs that do that and just run guys over. So anytime I see a big bruiser, they hold a special place in my heart. But then at tight ends, I just really, appreciate a tight end that is a really good blocker. And maybe, like you mentioned, wasn't utilized in the passing game, but shows all the traits. And I feel like, if you have the traits, you're a good route runner, you have the athleticism, you're going to have the opportunity to be on the field because of your blocking ability. And just, if I think a guy can develop into that good passing threat because of the traits, I really value them pretty highly as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think I view it kind of similarly too. I think for running backs, especially my type, are running backs that are really well-rounded, because we see some running backs that they have blazing speed, but they kind of struggle running through contact, and that doesn't really work out. Or if you have a guy who's just a power back, but he doesn't really offer much in the passing game, he's not going to get much playing time either. Sometimes when you have a player who's not spectacular at anything, but does everything really well, they were solid all around, that's when you get the finds, especially on day 3. I think Dameon Pierce falls into that category. I think Khalil Herbert falls into that category, Elijah Mitchell. Some of these guys who have been, productive players when they've been asked to carry a starting role, they come from that category. So without further ado, let's show our running back rankings. And at the top, there's no question, we both have Bijan Robinson. Alex, is Bijan the best running back that you've scouted ever?
Well, I was gonna ask you the same question. Yeah. I think he is. I think he just edges out Saquon for me, and I think it really comes down to when I was watching Saquon, I really felt that he was a home run hitter. He would have these, rip off 80, 90 yard runs. He had a ton of 10, 20-yard runs, but there were some plays where I saw him get taken down in the backfield. I just thought, why'd that happen? And I was willing to overlook those, as I think all of us were, because of his home run ability. And, he's still a very, very good player in the NFL when he's healthy. But I think Bijan he doesn't really get taken down in the backfield at all. I think he's just, the best running back I've scouted with my eyes.
I agree with you on that. And I mean, Bijan has everything. He's got great size, great power. He's fantastic between the tackles, can bounce runs outside too, great burst, athleticism, speed, like just really anything you can ask for. What really impresses me on top of all of that is that he's not just a dump it down to him and let him break tackles and try to put guys on skates after the catch. Like, I think that he has real potential to be used as a route runner, split out into the slot even at times. Like, this is how special that guy is, because you see him sometimes 15 yards downfield. He's able to adjust and locate the ball and snatch it out of the air with tremendous body control that you just don't see for running backs, period, and especially not running backs of that size. So I think that just adds to how special Robinson is. So that brings the question then is, there's so many people that are in agreement with us that Robinson is one of the best running backs they've ever scouted and one of the very best players in this draft class. But he is a running back. Running backs don't last very long in the NFL. Very often giving them that second contract turns out to be a bad idea. So how high would you be comfortable taking Robinson?
So I think it depends on what kind of team I am. I think in general, I think obviously I have a top 10 grade on Bijan Robinson. He's just that good of a player. But most of the time, if you're a team in the top 10, you're not really in contention. So I feel like you taking a running back early as a team that's not in contention, you're almost wasting the valuable years of that running back's career. Just because I feel like a running back can, really take you over the top if you're a playoff contender, and a guy like Bijan could turn you into a Super Bowl contender. But I think, if you're a team in the top 10, a running back like Bijan probably doesn't turn you into a contender to be in the championship game or maybe even the divisional round, just because of, the impact that running backs have on the game or maybe lack thereof. So top 10 grade, which, to me, I think the Eagles are a perfect spot. If I was, Jeffrey Lurie as the Eagles GM, I would be very, very tempted to take Bijan at number 10, just because you have an already great running game. And how would defenses defend Jalen Hurts and Bijan Robinson in that backfield when you also have a guy like A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith out at wide receiver and Dallas Goedert at tight end?
If I'm the Eagles, I'm picking Bijan Robinson. Honestly, I think you just made the Super Bowl and you came up just short. And yeah, there's a lot of that was on your defense, not your offense. But that offense hits another gear when you swap Miles Sanders for Robinson. Sanders is a solid starting running back. Robinson has the potential to be one of the top 5-10 running backs in the NFL from the second he puts on an NFL jersey. And especially in that running scheme, which is, I think Sirianni runs one of the very best running offenses in the NFL. So I think that would be really special. And just more globally, I agree with your point that it's not smart to take Bijan if you're not a contender, because you're going to waste the prime of his career when you're not a contender. But I think what it comes down to is, are you thinking what's best for the team and for the player, or are you trying to save your job? Because if I'm looking at some of these teams that are picking in the teens, like let's say the Washington Commanders, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I don't think that these teams, especially because of the quarterback situations that they have right now, are in shape to win that many games in the next year or two. And I think that inserting Bijan Robinson into these running back rooms that are right now ranking towards the bottom of the NFL, in my opinion, would actually get them 2 to 3 more wins than they would otherwise, because he's just that big of an upgrade, and you can make him the centerpiece of your offense, run him 20, 25 times a game, and you might be able to extend your lifespan as the head coach or GM of that team. So that's what fascinates me a little bit, is how are teams going to approach this? Is it going to be I know he's the biggest upgrade right now to win games right now to save my job, even if he's not a contender. And, in 5 years from now, when we are a contender, he might be a little run down or injured or not as productive. I think it's an interesting conundrum.
Yeah, and really quickly before we move on, where do you think his floor is?
In terms of where he gets drafted,
Yes.
I don't see him getting out of the first round. Honestly, I think the Bills at 27 might be his floor. I just don't see how, if he gets there, especially with their inability to really hit on a guy that's that good, and just knowing what that passing offense is, you add Bijan Robinson there, oof, that's scary.
Yeah, I think Bills at 27 definitely is the floor. And if he makes it there, he would make a lot of sense for the Bills. Probably enough about Bijan now. Everyone knows he's the best running back in the draft. Let's talk about our number 2 running back, Jahmyr Gibbs from Alabama.
Yeah, Gibbs is very different back from Bijan, but he's actually even more explosive than him, even faster than him. I think he's going to be a really dynamic weapon for a team, both in the receiving game and in the run game. My one reservation with him is that he's not that big, not that strong, and I wouldn't really be comfortable giving him about 20 carries a game. So I think you want to pair him with a bigger back. Let's take the Eagles, for example. They have a pick at the end of the first round. Rashad Penny struggles to stay healthy, but let's say if he stays healthy, that would be kind of the ideal 1-2 punch that I imagine Jahmyr Gibbs being in his career, is with a guy who's a solid, powerful running back, and he gets to just be that explosive weapon. I'm not saying that he's going to be change of pace. I mean, like, he's kind of like the 1A and the other guy's the 1B. I just wouldn't give him the whole workhorse load.
Yeah, I think an interesting spot would be the Chiefs at 31. I know, they took Clyde Edwards-Helaire at the end of the first round a couple of years ago, and that really hasn't worked out. But, pairing a guy like Gibbs with Isaiah Pacheco, who are two very, very different backs, I think would be, really interesting. And Gibbs is, like you mentioned, a lot quicker. He'll make guys miss. He won't obviously run through guys because he's a little bit smaller. But if you can limit him to I'd say 15 to 18 touches a game between handing him the ball and getting him in the passing game, I think that's kind of where he's best suited and could really be a game changer for some of these contenders.
I agree. I just think that this regime, after being in love with Clyde and thinking that he was going to be the guy who takes their offense to the next level, not that offense really needed another level, but that point is aside. And then getting Pacheco in the 7th round, I just feel like they kind of know that, all right, the way to draft a running back in their eyes now is probably in the later rounds, with how they've gotten kind of burnt by Clyde. But I think that would definitely be interesting. And now I think it gets really tough to stack some of these running backs, especially with some of these deferring styles with the running backs that we have next. So you've got at 3 Devin Achane, and at 4 Zach Charbonnet. Achane is kind of like a jitterbug, super fast, hits the hole with great burst, but he's not a real powerful back. Like, he's not going to churn out many yards after contact. Charbonnet, I don't want to take much away from his athleticism. I think it's definitely solid, but he's not nearly as dynamic. But he's a really powerful guy who falls under that category of super well-rounded, probably going to be a productive NFL starter. So what led you to put Achane over Charbonnet?
I think Achane's just overall a better running back. I think he can do more. To me, Charbonnet, like you mentioned, he's a really powerful guy. He's more of a between the tackles runner. He'll run you over, he'll break tackles, but he doesn't have that game-breaking speed. I think Achane does. He can, ideally run it outside the tackles. I think he can be involved in the passing game. So I think he can do more for an offense. He could be like a 1A speed guy, almost in a way like we were talking about Jahmyr Gibbs. And Zach Charbonnet I see is almost like a 1B, maybe not like the guy that's going to be the starter, but get, probably maybe 40% of the carries and the touches on a running back room. So Achane I kind of see maybe getting, split in 50-50. So that's kind of why I put him above Charbonnet.
Yeah, I do agree that Achane should be above Charbonnet. I think he brings a really special trait. And I know well-roundedness is important, but that burst and that speed is super impressive. And I think it can break a game open in the NFL. So I actually have Achane at 4. My third guy is Roschon Johnson from Texas. So yes, I've put a guy who wasn't even the RB1 on his own college team at third overall in my running back rankings. Because if you just turn on the tape, I know his opportunities were limited, but he is the total package of traits. He's a huge, bruising, powerful running back, but he's got surprising athleticism too. He can really cut well with super fluid hips, and he can make guys miss. He's really impressively shifty for that size. I just think that Roshan Johnson would have been a star anywhere else. And for me, just looking at his traits, his profile, his running ability, he's third for me. I think that he's more big and powerful than A-Chain, and while still being pretty athletic. So that's why I've got Roshan Johnson 3 and A-Chain 4. And I see you've got Johnson in your top 5, which is still a lot higher than some other people. So you're definitely in on him too.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, in a way surprising to me that he didn't transfer out of Texas because, like you mentioned, he could be a star somewhere else. But it's something I kind of appreciate about him. He was willing to, stick to his guns. No, this is where I committed. This is where I'm going to play. And I'm still going to make an impact on the offense. I think he's a really willing and good blocker. And I think he's just willing to do whatever they asked him to do.
Yeah.
He knew his role was to be behind Bijan, who's one of the best running backs in the probably the 20th century or the 21st century. So he knew his role. He accepted it, and I just think that's another thing that he can really, add to his traits. Probably, obviously a good character to just stay there, always do his job, do what was asked. So yeah, I'm really surprised that he's not as high in most other rankings as we both have him here.
Yeah, I think it just boils down to the fact that we haven't seen much of him, but you kind of have to ignore that because he sat behind Bijan Robinson, the one of the best running backs to come out of the draft in the last 20 years. And so to round out these running back rankings, I actually at number 5, I have Kendre Miller, who just beats out Zach Charbonnet. I think everything I said about Charbonnet as a player kind of applies to Miller too. They're really similar in terms of just their profile, their traits, their running ability. And so what it came down to for me was Miller has 200 less career carries than Zach Charbonnet. And I'm going to go with that guy because that matters for running backs. You don't want a running back with a lot of tread on his tires because we know there's already a short shelf life. That'll make it shorter compared to guys coming in the league with less wear. So that's what I've got there. Anything else you want to say about the running backs before we move on to the tight ends?
I really felt like outside of my top 5, I wasn't super impressed with a lot of the running backs.
Yeah.
I felt like a lot of the guys in the middle tiers, I felt like quite a few had fumbling issues. Who was some guys that came to mind? Spears, I saw a couple fumbles on tape.
Yeah.
Chase Brown, I saw a couple fumbles on tape.
Yeah.
So, some talent. But for me, if I see you fumble quite a bit as a running back, that's really going to knock you down my board.
Yeah, I agree. And for me too, the 6 guys that we had across our 2 top 5s are probably the only guys that I see starting in the NFL. I think the other guys can definitely add value as change of pace. Like Spears is really explosive and dangerous in the open field, but doesn't really profile as a starter for me. So I think that's a good way of looking at it. Now, the tight end group is really strong this year and also boasts a variety of different flavors. So I think that every team is going to rank them really differently based on what they look for in a tight end and what they need in a tight end. And for me, the number 1 guy is kind of the guy that just does all of it. It's Michael Mayer for Notre Dame, and he's your number 1 too. And the next guy on the list, I absolutely love too. So this says a lot that I maintain Mayer at number 1 because I just see an elite blocker who he's got size, length, strength, technique, a high football IQ, which is important for the blocking aspect of playing tight end. And, he's not that dynamic to create separation, but they still think he has some solid route running ability. He finds soft spots in zone, and he's incredible at contested catch situations. So because Mayer checks every box, I just think he's going to be a top 10 tight end in the NFL, and that's why I've got him number 1.
Yeah, I agree with that. And he's a guy that's kind of been around as a really good tight end in college for the past 3 years.
Yeah.
And I see quite a few rankings that don't have him as tight end 1. And I'm wondering if it's a little bit of a sense of, we've heard his name tossed around for the past 3 years. It kind of reminds me of how Trevor Lawrence was treated a couple of years ago, where it was like Lawrence was a consensus QB one, and then all of a sudden we're gonna throw around some question marks about him. I really felt similarly. I felt like that with Meyer as well. Like you mentioned, great blocker. He's not the most dynamic athlete and receiver, but I think he does everything you want from a tight end. A guy like Kincaid gives you everything you want from a receiving tight end and a little bit more. But I really think if you're building a tight end, in a lab, Meyer's going to give you kind of everything you're looking for there.
Yeah, I think it's a good way of looking at it. I would totally understand if people had Dalton Kincaid from Utah at number 2, because for me, he's just a hair behind Meyer. I fell in love with Kincaid when I turned on the tape. I watched him back in early January when he was kind of not even on the first round radar. I think by now the media has caught up to where the NFL is, and he is viewed as a solid first round prospect. But at that point, I was like, wow. I went in expecting to see a day 2 tight end, and I was blown away because he is a great receiver. He is super athletic. He runs really good routes. He's got really good speed to threaten downfield. He locates the ball well, adjusts really well, great body control. He's really good at contested catch situations. You just got to watch like the USC tape, for example, where he has over 200 yards receiving to see that he can be the focal point of an offense. Now, as a blocker, I think he's good for what he can be. He's not the absolute biggest tight end, so I don't think he's quite on the level of Meyer or another guy that we're going to talk about really soon in Darnell Washington. But I think that he's definitely better than what he's given credit for in that aspect. So I think Kincaid can be a really exciting prospect in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see him exactly the same in the receiving game. I wasn't a huge fan of his blocking, and that's why I do have him a little bit lower probably than you do, and I have him a decent step behind Michael Mayer, just because what I want from my tight ends them to be a very reliable and a good blocker, and I think that's probably why moving on to my third tight end, Darnell Washington, is why I have him at number 3, because he is, an extremely good blocker, similar to Meyer, where you put him outside next to the tackle and he's going to pretty much block anyone you ask him to. He's 260 plus pounds, 6'8", and extremely strong, extremely powerful. I'm sure everyone's seen that clip of him driving the sled, the combine, and he just makes it look effortless compared to the other tight ends. So he's got great drive, great technique as a blocker, and there's even some conversations about moving him or having him transition to tackle because of how good he is as a blocker. I don't think he should do that at all. I think he's going to be a really good tight end in the NFL.
Well, so then here's my question to you, because I see the exact same thing that you do as a blocker. Right? He's basically a 6th offensive lineman. That's how good he is. But how do you think he projects as a receiver?
I think he projects as a solid receiver. I don't think he's a guy that's going to be a 1,000-yard guy. I think he could, get 600 yards. I think he's going to be on the field all the time because of his blocking ability, in my opinion. And I think he's more athletic than people give him credit for. I mean, I saw him hurdle guys on tape. So to be 6'8", 265 pounds, you have to be quite athletic and quite explosive. I don't think he was utilized as much in the passing game as, I would have liked to see. But that's because there was a guy named Brock Bowers at Georgia that was the primary receiving tight end.
Yeah, for me, I just kind of struggle to see him being anything more than just a serviceable receiver. I think that you can use him as like a safety blanket underneath, and that's valuable. And I would love him in jump ball situations. Obviously, the guy's 6'8", and he has really good vertical leaping ability. So that's a real weapon, especially in the red zone. But this just, to me, it is not a guy who is dynamic whatsoever as a receiver. I don't see him being able to create separation through quick, crisp route running. So whereas the other guys that I have ahead of him, because I have Washington 5th, the other guys, Luke Musgrave is a really athletic, dynamic receiving weapon who I think can threaten downfield. He's one of the few tight ends who truly can stretch the field vertically. So that's what I really like in him. Although the difference between him and Kincaid is that Musgrave just isn't as good of a blocker to me. I think he's really more of your move tight end. And then Laporta, kind of similar, really good route runner and athlete, not a fantastic blocker, but I think solid, and he's pretty strong. So you're kind of just trying to improve the technique for him to be able to be a serviceable blocker. And then there's Washington, who I love the blocking, but I know the combine numbers were great, and that's what makes it a tough evaluation for me. Is the guy had the third quickest three cone in the entire draft class, and that just blows my mind because I didn't quite see that on tape. So I think I just want to trust the tape more than the combine numbers. But it's tough. I know he could come back and bite me in the butt. That's the tough part of this one. This is one of the prospects where my evaluation and looking at my notes, I slot him in at 5th, but I wouldn't be surprised if he made me eat my words.
Yeah, he's super talented, and you mentioned that those combine numbers from the three cone drill was just crazy to think about for a guy that big. I want to touch on Musgrave a little bit, or excuse me, I want to touch on Musgrave and Laporta a little bit too.
Mm-hmm.
Like you mentioned, Musgrave, a great downfield receiving threat. I just really struggled with his blocking.
Yeah, that's fair.
I know he played 2 games in 2022, and then he had that injury, which also was a little bit concerning for me. I don't really like, some of my higher rated prospects to miss almost the full season before they come out into the draft. But I just felt like he struggled as a blocker. And I know he's not going to be utilized as that, but from a tight end perspective, I want my tight ends to be at least serviceable as blockers. And I think he might be, that under the serviceable line. I saw him lean a lot, drop his head while blocking guys, struggle with hand placement, and almost put his shoulder into guys sometimes. So for me, that's why I have him 4th behind Washington, just because I feel like he's going to struggle pretty greatly as a blocker. And then Laporta, another super athletic guy that was pretty much Iowa's entire offense. I think he would have been much better on a team that had a better offense than Iowa had, and could have had a quarterback that could get him the ball, a little bit better and a little bit more reliable than he had. But again, for him, I think some blocking technique as well. And I saw a couple of drops, and that's why I have him below Musgrave.
Yeah. I mean, Iowa really produces those tight ends. It's impressive. It's quite the pipeline for a team that's not really among the teams that recruit the best in the country. I also wanted, before we get off the air, talk about a couple guys who aren't on this list, because I think that there are definitely a couple more NFL starters out of this tight end class. For me, Tucker Kraft or actually first Davis Allen and then Tucker Kraft were right behind Laporta and Washington, because Davis Allen is a guy who I think is a really good blocker. He might not really be a route runner as a receiver yet. You're hoping to develop that ability, but he shows the ability to find soft spots in zone. He's decently athletic to offer him potential as a receiver, and he's great in contested catch situations. So I see him as a solid starting tight end. And then there's Tucker Kraft, who is really intriguing because I love the traits, really the size, the length, the strength, the athleticism. For me, it's all there. It's just such a projection to the NFL because he was a great blocker. But would he have been a great blocker if he was playing against SEC competition? And he only caught 27 catch balls this season. So that makes me question, even though he has the traits, can he become a productive receiver in the NFL when he not only has the jumping competition, but also just has to develop his receiving game? So what did you think of Kraft?
Yeah, I felt like, it's hard enough to project tight ends from FCS or FBS to the NFL level. I think it's even harder to project a guy like Kraft coming from South Dakota State at the FCS level to the NFL level. And I think that blocking really is what stands out to me most, right? He was a good blocker, like you mentioned, but he's playing against guys that probably won't even make an NFL roster at any point just because they're at the FCS level. So how much of that can you really take into consideration? And then the lack of catches this season also was a little bit concerning for me, but he has all the traits. I think it might take him, a year or two to kind of get going and adjust and get to where he needs to be. But he definitely has the potential to be a starter at the NFL level.
Yeah, he could fall in line with some of those tight ends that really get better once they're on their second contract. And honestly, Dallas Goedert went to South Dakota State, and he could follow a pretty similar trajectory. And if you're given that assurance that by his second contract he's going to be playing as well as Dallas Goedert is playing now, a team's probably going to want to take a shot on that pretty early. And that's why I think you could see him come off the board in the second round. And, even beyond the guys we listed, Zach Kuntz blew up the combine. Payne Durham was outstanding at the Senior Bowl. Luke Schoonmaker has fantastic traits, is just still learning the tight end position. He has some potential too. So I'll be really excited to see how these tight ends turn out because it's a really solid class, and I'll want to see where they get drafted on draft weekend.
Yeah, just something interesting about Schoonmaker before we end this podcast. My cousin actually played high school football with him, and he was a quarterback for most of his high school career. And then I'm pretty sure it was his senior year where they had him kind of split time at quarterback and tight end just because he was being recruited to be a tight end because of his measurables. And obviously his measurables are, off the charts with his size and his length. But obviously definitely still learning the position because he really only played tight end in college. So definitely something interesting and something, worth noting going through the scouting process with him.
Absolutely. It's always important to be aware of when a player has only been playing that position for a couple of years because it means that they're really still ascending. Whereas sometimes if you have a guy who's played the position his whole life and he played 4 years in college, some things that aren't fixed are just not going to get fixed. So it's really important to consider the context there. But yeah, this was really fun talking about these running backs and tight ends. And if you've been watching and you've enjoyed this, feel free to shoot us a DM on Instagram and let us know what position groups you would like to see next, because we'll definitely want to have another podcast just like this where we break down a couple position groups. And yeah, we want to give you guys what you guys want to hear. So thank you everyone for watching.
Yep. Less than a month until the draft.
Yep.
A lot of stuff going on, rumors, smoke, everything. I think it's officially 30 days until the draft. So a fun, exciting time filled with, a lot of information. We'll be sure to get all of our position groups out to you before draft time. So thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with another episode soon.